Welcome to Voice for Infection Prevention, where we explore the latest developments, challenges, and insights in the field of infection prevention and control. With a passion for promoting patient safety and healthcare excellence, we're excited to bring you engaging discussions with experts, leaders, and innovators in the field. So whether you're a seasoned professional or just beginning your journey in infection prevention, welcome to the conversation. This is Voice for Infection Prevention.
Welcome to Voice for Infection Prevention. I'm your host, Jacob Hutcherson. Today, we've got a special treat for you. Joining us today is someone who's been at the forefront of infection prevention for over 2 decades. Please welcome Martin Levesque. He's the System Director of Infection Prevention at Henry Ford Health System. Martin has his MPH, MBA, CIC, and is a fellow of FAPIC. In today's episode, we have the honor of tapping into Martin's wealth of experience and expertise, particularly focusing on his advice and insights for those aspiring to excel in the field of infection prevention. We'll take a deep dive into Martin's personal career journey, exploring how he navigated pivotal situations, from his career trajectory to the strategies he swears by. Martin's guidance is essential for anyone committed to making a difference in this critical realm of healthcare. So, without further ado, let's dive into our conversation with Martin Levesque and explore the front lines of infection prevention together.
This episode is sponsored by Clutch Recruitment, the leading recruiting firm in the country, recruiting exclusively within infection prevention and control.
So my name is Martin Levesque. I'm System Director of Henry Ford Health System. I've been in this role for 7 years. I've been in infection prevention for over 20 years. And my journey started when I was in my Master's of Public Health program. I was in the University of Michigan School of Public Health, following their hospital molecular epidemiology track. And we had a guest lecturer who was actually a current infection preventionist at a neighboring health system, came in and did a guest lecture, and it was on CAUTI prevention. And I said, wow, this is interesting. I didn't realize there was this role out there in health systems just focus on prevention of HAI. So that was really the first time I was introduced into infection prevention. Up until then, my master's program was focused more on field work or laboratory research, and then maybe public policy, that aspect of it. But I never really was aware of the hospital-based component. That being said, I spoke with the presenter afterwards to gain some additional information, and we developed a good rapport with each other, and one thing led to another, and I actually ended up filling her role at the health system she was working at as she progressed on to a different position. So
Wow.
if nothing else, it really shows the strength of networking, and just having those conversations with individuals, even if you may not be terribly comfortable with it. I certainly felt out of my league. I was new. I didn't know anything about hospital-based infection prevention, but having that conversation with that guest lecturer started opening up doors, and conversations led to other questions. And the next thing you know, I'm interviewing for a role at a major health system in Southeast Michigan. And well, I guess you can say the rest is history. I've been in infection prevention ever since.
Wow. Okay. So that first role, what was the title?
It was infection control specialist.
Infection control specialist. And how big was that facility?
So this was at the main facility in Detroit. So it was about, I want to say it was between 800 and 1,000 beds. It was a major teaching hospital in downtown Detroit. Very active emergency department, very big facility. Kind of what we used to call the quote unquote mothership for the neighboring hospitals that were also part of that health system. But this was the main facility for that program.
Awesome. So that, Trying to think, I actually just talked yesterday to the system director at Marshfield Clinic over 7 hospitals, and she went through the master's program at Michigan, specialization in epidemiology, and had a similar path. So that's interesting, because I guess there's not, you can correct me if I'm wrong, there's not too many universities, right, that offer what the University of Michigan does.
Well, I think it's growing in popularity. At the time, I wasn't aware of any in the state of Michigan, but since then, I know Wayne State University has an MPH program, a public health program. Michigan State University has a program as well. But University of Michigan School of Public Health now offers what's called a CHIP program, which is a certification in hospital infection prevention. When I was a master's of public health student, they did not offer that. So the program didn't involve hands-on internships in the hospitals that would support the program. But of course, being an alumni, I am more than happy to support interns. And every year we try to get some interns to do projects at our hospitals. Usually it's a summer-long type of project. Depending on different needs. And it's a great way for us to give back to the program, but also to open the eyes of young professionals to see if this is something that they truly want to pursue. I have yet to have anyone turn away and say, no, I don't want to do this anymore.
So, okay, when you got the first job and you listened to the lecturer, what was the lecturer's background? Educational background?
So if I recall correctly, I mean, she was an infection control specialist as well. I don't recall truly if she had a nursing background or if she was a lab tech or an MPH background, Master's in Public Health background. But those typically are the 3 main tracks that we see as infection preventionists. There is a 4th that occasionally you'll come across, and that would be a physician-trained individual that either wants to broaden their scope or perhaps they were a physician in a different country. And then when they came to the United States, either they didn't want to take their boards or, for whatever reason, they went into infection prevention. Actually, I had an excellent coworker who was from Afghanistan. She was a physician in Afghanistan, came over to the United States and became an infection preventionist, and was just phenomenal to work with. Great individual, great cook. Gotta love that food. So.
Very cool. So when you joined, what year was that when you had your first job in infection?
Oh, let's see. I'm not terribly good with math, but I would say 98. Around 1998.
98, okay. And you said it was an 800-bed hospital.
Yeah.
Do you remember what the staffing ratio was back then?
Well, I know from my department when I came in, there were 2 other coworkers that I worked with. Plus, I had a boss, so my director. Okay. So there were 3 of us. And we never felt that, we were very well supported by our director, but we never felt like we had all the resources we truly wanted. In fact, it seems to be a message that has just been repeated over and over again, where we're not really preventionist. Even to this day, we're very much into control. A fire pops up, and we show up on the scene and we address it, whether it's a water intrusion event, whether it's an outbreak situation, whether it's a pandemic, right? So we're very good at coming to the scene and controlling, getting things back to normal. But I say we have a lot of room for improvement when it comes to prevention, getting ahead of the game so that we don't have an issue. And I know there's a lot of excellent talent out there that is working diligently on becoming more preventionist. But I would say by far, most of us are still in the infection control aspect of it.
Yeah, interesting. Because I know there was a pretty big push, right, to change a a lot of your infection control titles to infection prevention titles here in the last 10 years or so for that reason, right? To change the focus.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we are making some headway in that regard. I mean, most of us are called, like, for example, my health system, we're now called infection prevention specialists. We don't even have control in our title. But old habits die hard. They still colloquially call our department infection prevention and control, or even infection control. I don't take offense to anything. I'll respond to any of it. For me, it's more of what's the job that needs to be done. What are you reaching out for me for? And we'll address it. But I think that speaks to that whole mentality that we're trying to become more preventionist. We're trying to get ahead of the game. I think we've made a lot of headway with HAIs, our hospital associated infections, CLABSI prevention, CAUTI prevention, those sorts of things we have made some good headway in. But it's been years we've been working on this, right? It's not a 2-year, 5-year project. Since I've started, we've been working with CAUTI prevention, CLABSI prevention, and it's just an ongoing effort.
Wow. Yeah. Tell me, going back to the first job, I'm changing topics a little bit here,
Yep.
But I want to hone in on to the MPH aspect of this. So I've been in the infection prevention recruiting space since 2012. So I'm 11 years in, and there's been a significant difference in the amount of convincing I'm having to do for hospitals to consider a non-nurse for a role.
Yeah.
So I think it's definitely trending the right direction as far as people becoming more open-minded to it. The fact that you landed a infection prevention role as a pure MPH back in the 80s, I think, is significant. So I want to hone in here. I know you don't remember what the person whose role you took. You didn't necessarily remember their background, but was there anybody else in the department with you that was also an MPH or without a clinical background?
Yeah, so that's a great point, and I really give credit to my first boss who had a kind of a vision, and she had the trifecta. So I had 2 other coworkers. One of them had a very strong nursing background, and then the other one came from the microbiology lab tech background. And then I came on board, provided the hospital molecular epidemiology perspective, so more of the epi point of view. And together, we all worked off each other's strengths, and we all recognized that we had weaknesses, but we were there to support each other. In fact, that initial program I had really set the foundation for how as I worked through administration, how I used that to develop my programs afterwards. But I was the only one that was a public health prepared individual. But we all became certified. We all went through CIC, NHSN training, but we were able to help each other out along the way. And where my strength with statistics and epidemiology would help them out, they were able to help me out with more clinical aspects. I wasn't a nurse. I didn't know the first thing about Foley insertion or central lines, but I was able to be coached and mentored and trained. And so that's incredibly important to have that support out there.
That's amazing. I mean, I think most system directors or or really anybody managing a program, I think now probably is on the same page that the most diverse group of people, diverse group of backgrounds is going to be the most effective team in this environment. It's amazing to me that somebody in a leadership position she's just way ahead of her time.
She was.
Like. Yeah, that's awesome. So then even though it sounds like the leadership was great and supportive of this, and you had a team that really worked well together, when it came to addressing, nurses or physicians or just anybody in kind of the clinical setting, obviously without a clinical background, particularly in your early years on the floor, did you did you see a significant amount of resistance to that, or did
Well,
you get
it
the respect
depends
from
on,
others as well?
yeah, it depends on the topic and who you were addressing. I mean, I remember going out doing hand hygiene rounds, and I'm being a confident young infection preventionist, and I noted a physician who walked in and out of a room without performing hand hygiene, and I approached him trying to be respectful and, excuse me, sir, I couldn't help but notice you didn't perform hand hygiene when you exited the patient's room, and he lit into me. He basically said, "Who the heck do you think you are to tell me when I'm supposed to wash my hands?" And at that point, being a young, you know, infection preventionist in the field, and being publicly, I mean, this is out in the hallway, and this guy was very loud. He just shut me down, right? But now I think back on that, and I'm like, how dare he do that? And we do a lot of coaching with our young infection preventionists, but also with our hand hygiene folks, that you may run into that. But I think the culture has changed. Now we actually have the opportunity that if we were to encounter something like that, we can actually submit an RL or a safety report for basically it's physician. What's the word? Sorry. Oh, shoot. Professional behavior. Sorry.
There you go.
So we're gonna pause. We'll wind back up. So we have nowadays we have the ability to report physicians on physician behavior. So if there are issues with physicians barking, for lack of a better term, at people that are trying to do their job, there's a method for holding those physicians accountable. Back then, that wasn't really the case. So it was pretty much, okay, that was shocking. And I knew to stay away from that physician. But fortunately, I did have support from my other peers, and we continued the program. But yeah, so sometimes it is difficult when you don't have a clinical background, especially if you're a sole IP. You really have to be self-motivated to partner up with a clinical nurse specialist or a bedside nurse or someone that is willing to help share that clinical aspect with you. And once you develop that rapport that you're here to help them, you're here to help the patients ultimately, right? This is all about patient safety. You're not here to report them. You're not here to make them look bad. You're not here to, make sure they don't get any kind of raises or promotions. Once that has been, removed from the equation, then people start developing these better rapports, and you start to learn. You learn from each other. I was able to teach the nurses some aspects, and they were able to teach me some aspects that I wasn't aware of. So that's really how this develops.
No, that's excellent, and I want to hone in on that a little bit, especially in your early years as a staff level person. How did you kind of in detail go about learning the clinical piece? I know you mentioned teaming up with a couple people that were receptive, but can you give any, I don't know if you have specific stories of how you went about it, or kind of just what your mindset was like when you walked in on that first day, like, okay, I've got to figure this out, and kind of how you went about it?
So first of all, I was eager to learn. So I was reading as much as I could. And before I was even allowed to go out on my own on the units, I had to partner up with one of the IPs. I was kind of given some basic roles. Now, I understand that not every infection preventionist entering the field has a team of other IPs that they can depend on, right? Or at least under the same roof. Sometimes you're the sole IP for a smaller facility, sometimes multiple facilities. And I know there are some IPs that have a very expansive responsibility. And I shake my head. How can you possibly do all of that as one person? Some of them wear multiple hats. They're employee health, they're infection prevention, they're HR, and they're the valet. I mean, they do all of it, right? That being said, for me, it was, again, having that support in my department. It was an eagerness on my part to learn, but it's also kind of being humble and saying, "Hey, I've never inserted a central line, so if you don't mind, can you walk me through the steps, kind of thing." Or just being a good observer and requesting to stand in a corner and watch them insert a Foley or watch them insert a central line. And you learn things. I'll be honest, I don't know how many times I've observed a surgery and I didn't even know what to look for. I was in there and I was in the corner, but it was so new and it was all the bright lights and wow, this is someone who's got their belly exposed and I can see, so that initial wow factor, it took a couple sessions before that got over and all right, that's just another, colon procedure, but I'm paying attention now to the technique a little bit more, how they perform sterile technique, what the different job rules are in an OR. And even to this day, there's still ample opportunity for me to learn more and more. It's amazing. In fact, that's one of the reasons I really like infection prevention. It's really what you make of it. So if you have a hunger and a desire to do more and more, infection prevention is a great avenue. There's the desktop aspect where you're entering data, but that can become mundane. So you can make more of it. You can go into research. You can do any number of different things with infection prevention. It's really quite a remarkable field.
So let's see. So let's jump back into kind of career progression.
Yep.
You went into this role. You had a couple other people working with you, then a director, large hospital. How long did you stay in that role?
So this is an interesting kind of story. So one of my coworkers, the one I actually had the nursing background, was the more seasoned infection preventionist of our team. And when my current boss retired, the job required a master's prepared individual in either a master's of nursing or a health-related field, and public health met that requirement. Now, I was only there for, I think, a year and a half, 2 years, but I was the only one that had a master's under my belt. So technically, if I wanted to become the director of that department, I was able to take that position. However, understanding that as a new IP, 2 years, you're barely getting your feet wet in infection prevention, right? So I didn't push back. In fact, I told the nurse, that she was interested in the position, and I said, I'm not going to fight you for it. I think it makes more sense that you're in this role. Well, that actually, I think, solidified our friendship. We've been great friends ever since. She's a system director at a neighboring health system. I'm a system director, so it all works out great in the end. But I still learn from her to this very day. But in terms of my personal progression, after she became my boss, I actually took an opportunity to become a manager at a different health system, a manager of infection prevention. So it was a smaller facility, just a couple IPs in a department, infection preventionists in a department. But I used that opportunity, and at the time they called it a working manager position. So you were an infection preventionist, but you were also helping to manage the department. So that's kind of how I started into my administrative role. And I did that for a number of years and was able to, I guess you could say, climb the ladder from that point.
Gotcha. Okay. So, and I don't know if we'll pull this in or not, but out of curiosity, who is the system leader that you referenced there?
The one that we currently have, or the one that was my friend that I gave?
Yeah.
Do you know Doreen Burial-Cass?
Yes, very well.
Out of Spectrum, who's now Corewell. Yeah, so we were coworkers. We were desk mates, across cubicles. And the other person that actually got me into infection prevention was Lisa Sturm, who's over Ascension Health.
Yep.
So two very big names.
So you got some big names there. Yep. I think both of those are on our short list of people to reach out to. So hopefully you'll get some.
Excellent individuals. In fact, I owe everything to Lisa. But Doreen and I go way back, and I still learn from both of them. They're both phenomenal individuals. So.
That's outstanding. That's great. Goodness. Okay. So this manager position though you referenced
Yeah.
that you took, did you have any? I guess did you have any difficulty landing that job not being a nurse?
I didn't, because by that time I had established myself as an infection preventionist. Now, I'll be honest. You're always looking for your next best opportunity. Even if you're very happy with where you're at, you really should always keep your options open. Or at least that's how my father ingrained it in me. You got to look out for yourself. No one's going to look out for you, kind of thing. And I'll be honest. I still think there are an overwhelming number of health systems that require an RN to be an infection preventionist or in a leadership role, which that's their business. That's fine, but I think they're shortchanging themselves. Honestly, I think it really needs to be someone who's best for the job, um, and maybe a nurse, but I think there's some excellent, highly qualified individuals that have other backgrounds. Um, and it's kind of like the proof is in the pudding, and how you develop yourself. Again, you have some individuals, and just because you're a nurse doesn't mean you're going to be an excellent infection preventionist either. It really depends on that individual. But that being said, I think I had established my rapport. I had actually, through networking, knew one of the IPs at this facility that I was applying for. So kind of got that good word of recommendation in there. They gave me an opportunity, and I was able to excel in that role. And that actually led to my next role, which was I took from that same facility, I became their quality director, which oversaw the infection prevention program. But it also gave me the opportunity to work more in patient safety, as well as the reporting aspects. So your CMS reportables and your other requirements. Um, but I'll tell you, even when I was quality director, I thought patient safety was fascinating, but I always had a passion for infection prevention. And lo and behold, I went back into infection prevention as a system director at a different health system within Southeast Michigan.
Okay. So this is fascinating. So I want to stop and talk about the transition into quality just for a minute. Obviously, I know the purpose of this is infection prevention, but one of the things that
Sure.
I've come across talking to some of the higher level people, and sometimes they've thought about, sometimes they haven't, but once you become a system director over so many hospitals, my question is always kind of like, okay, what's next? I mean, if you're going to grow and you're going to advance in infection prevention, really all that means is swapping to a new health system with a few more hospitals, which is going to require relocation almost all the time.
Right.
So when I talk to people that have reached kind of the system level or multiple places, it's kind of like, okay, what's the, like, for somebody, especially somebody that's moved up the ladder quick, like what's the progression here? What do you do? And you've seen people kind of add additional things to their plate, whether it be accreditation or quality or patient safety or employee health maybe, or some sort of nursing position potentially. But it feels like in every single case, they're throwing an extra 10 grand on and you're doing another full-time job. And it's just like, okay, so that's not really feasible. And then so because infection prevention reports to quality most of the time, for me, just like reading resumes, it's like, well, do you jump into quality? Like, is that the next position? It oversees infection, kind of allows you to grow. But it doesn't seem like that's the path that most infection prevention professionals want to take. So I'm curious kind of what led to your decision to jump into quality, and then kind of what obviously you fell back into infection, so you learned something there. But I want to know kind of what that transition was. Was there a lot of overlap? Was it what you were expecting, or kind of talk through that a little bit?
So yeah, that's a great question. So obviously, as a manager of infection prevention at this hospital, I developed a great working relationship with my administrators, my bosses, so to speak. And when that quality director position came open, I was encouraged to apply for it. And I was like, oh, well, I don't know anything about, quality, I know just the infection prevention. And I knew that the infection prevention department reported up to the quality director. Um, but I didn't really know much about it. And folks were like, you're a great individual. You're going to pick up on this. You've got a lot of supporting, folks that'll help you with that. So to me, it was almost by luck that I was able to have that opportunity. And I was very interested in it. And then as I became the quality director at this organization, I started pursuing other learning opportunities. So I learned about human factors engineering. That was another thing that plays a huge role into patient safety. Maybe not so much infection prevention, or at least I thought at the time. But after I started delving into that because of patient safety, it really opened my eyes that, wow, there's a huge component of infection prevention related to human factors. How do you make it easy for people to do the right thing and not so complicated? For example, having a central line insertion kit or a Foley insertion kit, making it easy so that the first products you use are the ones on the top, and that you're not having to rifle through this kit trying to find, what goes next. You lay it out to make it easy to do the right thing. Um, as an infection preventionist, I was never, I guess, introduced to human factors until I became quality director. So then it's using that education and rolling it back in. Honestly, I probably would have stayed in quality and patient safety, but for personal reasons, I couldn't report to my wife anymore. I don't know if I can say that, but my
Yeah.
wife became in a different role, but she became the system VP over quality and patient safety for that health system.
Okay.
Um, Kind of put me in an awkward position, which is why I left that health system, went to a different health system as the system director of infection prevention at a different health system.
Excellent.
So I still had infection prevention to land on, but yeah, I mean the passion is still there for infection prevention, and there's so much work that needs to be done. Um, it's just it's almost overwhelming, quite honestly. You have to take off little pieces at a time, otherwise you'll choke on it. So,
Yeah. So how much? So this is when you jumped into kind of your first director role. Um,
yep.
how many years of experience did you have before you made that jump?
So I was an infection preventionist. Excuse me. I want to say it was about 10 years total of infection prevention time. Before being a system director, I was a quality director, and then the manager of infection prevention. So maybe I was only a quality director for a little over a year, I believe. It wasn't a huge amount of time. So maybe, yeah, it was a pretty quick progression. But so maybe 3 or 4 years in that managerial director role, and then became a system director. And it wasn't a very large health system, but the opportunity was there. And like I tell my individuals right now when we apply or interview for applicants, um, yeah, the initial resume is what attracts your attention, but you're always being interviewed against your pool of other candidates. So if I was applying for that same job with my, previous boss or the individual that taught the CAUTI course, and we were in that same pool, I probably would not have made that cut, for that system
Right.
director role. But the stars were aligned and things worked out well. But once I got my foot in the door, I was able to establish myself. We had good outcomes. We showed good reduction in our HAIs. So the proof was in the pudding. Not only that, but as a manager, my employees really supported me. I supported them. And I think that's what you start to look for when you have managers and directors. You don't want someone that necessarily is going to come in and kick over a garbage can and disrupt everything, saying, this is all garbage, you got to do it over. That just wasn't my style. So I think my style may have worked well for these individuals that I worked for. So.
Gotcha. And you mentioned this was a smaller system that you joined initially. What's the scope of that?
So that was the first system that I was a system director for. Consisted of 4 hospitals. Uh, their largest teaching hospital, I think, only had 700, 800 beds. And then they had smaller acute care facilities in the southeast Michigan area. One of them was considered downriver, so it was a little bit further of a distance. Um, but it was a great opportunity for me to show that I can do more than just one site, right? Um,
Yeah.
and the folks want to see that. They want to see. They don't want to see a director that just sits in the office, right? They want to see someone that can network and work and go to the sites and get active. And that's I think what worked out well for me.
Yeah. Was
That
this the
role.
first job um, that had you going in between multiple facilities, or
Correct.
okay, so it
Yeah.
was okay. So not even
Yeah.
managing multiple facilities. This was your first time going in and out of multiple spots.
Right. The only thing I would say about that is when I was the manager of infection prevention, I worked well with the other hospitals in that system. We were very collaborative. I've always tried to promote transparency, break down silos, especially if you're in a health system. There really shouldn't be reasons that you have separate policies. um, and at the time I was like, oh, they have different resources. But all that really boils down to is, folks, change is hard, right? Unless
Hmm.
you're, as the saying say, standardization is easy if everybody does what I do. But you have to be open minded, and you have to see, well, what are they doing? And sometimes it's a give and take relationship. So we worked very well. I worked very well with the other sites in our system. And that might have also helped me win the support when I applied for that system director role. So even though I didn't have a system director title, I did do work with the other sites per se in terms of collaboration, policy building, trying to break down barriers.
Gotcha. Now, in that, what was the what was the reporting structure there? So, I guess how many direct reports did you have, and then did those were you kind of in a corporate office, or did everybody report directly to you, or what was that setup?
So that's interesting, and I don't know if this is just a model in Southeast Michigan, but
Hmm.
most of the infection preventionists, or at least at the sites that I've worked at, they report directly to their quality directors. So when I was a quality director at that facility, the IPs reported to me. But then when I became a system director, the IPs were reporting to their quality directors. So I was a one-man show providing direction for the infection prevention program at those 4 other sites in the health system, if that makes
Wow.
sense.
Okay. Yeah. So I've definitely come across several health systems that are built this way. So it's not uncommon, but it definitely is not like this everywhere. Um,
Yeah,
so
the only
I want to.
direct report I had was my administrative assistant. And quite honestly, I've been raised to be more or less self-sufficient, and I almost didn't even know what to do with an administrative assistant because I was so accustomed to managing my own calendars and schedules and setting up my own meetings that it took a while for me to let go of those sorts of things. So,
Interesting. Interesting. Okay. So then, okay, I want to dive into this reporting structure a little bit.
yeah.
Um, so now, for the first time in your career, from what I'm understanding, it you are, and I guess that's not dissimilar from other places, maybe, but you're essentially managing people that you have no, I mean, you have authority over as a dotted line, but you're also
Yep.
not their boss, and you're not there at that facility every day.
Correct.
So it's a unique relationship. And so I'm curious as to how you went about, or how you would encourage others going about forming the relationships and the respect necessary without having the true direct line that many may expect.
Yeah, and that's a great question, and actually one that we have as our standing interview question when we have new applicants. And the question is basically, we don't have direct authority over other individuals. So how do you get them to do what you'd like them to do in terms of infection prevention? In that kind of nutshell. So it's
Yeah.
the same principle. It's kind of showing them the big picture, where we want to get to. My personal style, I'm not a micromanager, so I don't want to be reading every one of your emails. I don't want to be looking over your shoulder, and I don't do time management. So to me, it's all about the work that needs to be done and getting it done. And if you can do that and produce high quality work in half the time, great. That's all the better. But if it takes you double the time, I'm okay with that. But most of these positions are salaried, so there is an overtime. That being said, I am concerned about burnout. I am concerned about those individuals, and it's not the ones that take 2 hours. They have their days spread out. It's the ones that are constantly hitting the pavement. They're hammering this. I see them burning out faster, almost like a flash. Like they're going to give it 110%, and then all of a sudden they're exhausted. They're worn out. So it's working with those individuals to kind of help pace themselves out. But it's also realizing there are different personalities. There are individuals that are that are just going to go at their own pace. And that's okay, so long as the quality of work is there. Now, if it becomes an issue where, reports aren't being done in a timely fashion, or, just the caliber of the work isn't meeting expectation, then you have to have that crucial conversation with that individual. But I'm not a micromanager. I'm not one that says you have to be a button in the seat for 8 hours a day, right? Kind of thing. But I think my employees appreciate that, and in doing so, they give back in that regard. They give back, and they try to do the best that they can. And so far, I've been very happy with them. So it's developing that rapport, but it is matrix reporting. So they don't report directly to me, but I have a relationship with the quality directors that they do report to, and say, hey, I want you to know so and so is doing a phenomenal job. They're doing a great work. They're being supportive of their teammates. They're identifying challenges and issues, and it's providing that feedback to the quality director. And sometimes it's a difficult conversation. Hey, have you noticed that so and so just doesn't seem to be as engaged as everyone else? And sometimes it turns out that the quality director is more of a challenge than the IPs, because the IPs go to the quality director for assistance to help knock down barriers or get work done. And that quality director is having their own challenges, so to speak. So
Very interesting.
it is interesting. And that's all about the corporate world, matrix reporting, and just being able to work with other individuals. I think there is a certain savoir-faire, for lack of a better term, on how to manage that. I've seen IPs that were technically correct, but they were steadfast. They drew a line in the sand and said, this is what we have to do. And yeah, that's what you do to prevent an infection. But the reality is, with this process or the resources that are available, they're not able to do that. So you have to bend a little bit and work in developing a better process, right? But when you're rigid and steadfast, there's a time and a place for that. And sometimes you have to give a little bit to make inroads. So
That's a good answer. I want to get to the end of your career, just to make sure we touch on everything. So I think it looks like you've had 3 director level or above positions. in infection prevention. So I think if I'm following this properly, you make 2 more moves to get where you are now. So you want to quickly take us to how you landed where you are now?
Yeah, so the reason I'm in my current health system is the system that I was a system director for was bought out by Beaumont, well, the health system that I previously worked for. And again, because of reporting relationships, I needed to find a different route. And again, this is I was fortuitous in timing. They were looking for a system director at the system that I'm working at now. At that time, I put in for the role, interviewed well. And of course, it is networking, and the folks that you interview with, I'm sure they know key players at these other health systems. And that's one of the things that I've learned over the years is healthcare is a very small world. I mean, at first I was pretty naive thinking, oh, Dr. A only works at this hospital. Well, he works at 3 or 4 hospitals in the health system. Now I realize he works in 3 or 4 different health systems. So it really is a small world. And, it's not about burning bridges, but it's about establishing good networking skills, developing those rapports with those individuals. And even if you don't necessarily agree on something, there's a way to address that so that everyone, has something to say about it and can save face, so to speak, as you work through those issues. So now I'm in this health system because of timing, but also the situation I was in. I've been here for 7 years. Absolutely love it. Love the people I work with. In fact, my current CMO was the hospital president of the physician body of the hospital that I was a quality director at. So talk about a small world. Again, being able to network and have those inroads also helps, establish that trajectory, if you want to put it that way. So, but once you're in the role, you have to prove yourself, right? So it's not good enough just to say, oh yeah, I was a system director before, and now I'm just going to sit back on my laurels. You're constantly being asked to produce, whether it's HAI reduction or develop some other program. And I had some harsh feedback from my current role. This was right before the pandemic. It was actually November of 2019. It almost was like as if it happened yesterday. But my boss basically said that things are going to have to change, otherwise we're not going to have you here any longer. That's pretty harsh criticism to get. And I was asked, well, what's the issue? Where am I falling short? And because our HAIs were decreasing and stuff, the advice she gave me was, you're not enough of a storyteller. And I'm like, what the heck does that mean? I'm not a storyteller. I don't BS anybody, And I was so not insulted, but kind of hurt that I might be losing my job, right? This was a crucial conversation, and it wasn't easy for her to have either. But after a while, I was able to digest what she was truly saying. And by being a storyteller, it's providing that vision of where you want to take infection prevention. And sometimes I got so detail oriented in the day-to-day activities that I was missing out on the bigger picture. And when you start dealing with senior administrators, your C-suite, your board members, they don't want to know about, oh, how many cases I had to do chart review on today. They want to know, how are we progressing? What are we doing to overcome barriers? What does a light look like at the end of the tunnel? I mean, are we heading towards better days, or is it going to get worse? After I understood that, I was able to change my position and my ability to storytell. So, it's always a learning experience. You're always learning. The minute you say, oh, I've got this all down pat and I don't need to learn anymore, you might as well be retired. And even then, I don't know if I'd ever stop learning. So.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Voice for Infection Prevention. We hope you found our discussions informative and insightful. Remember to subscribe to our podcast for more conversations with experts in the field, and don't forget to leave us a review to let us know what you think. For additional resources and to stay updated on the latest news in infection prevention, visit our website at voiceforip.com. Thank you again for listening. Until next time, stay safe and continue your commitment to excellence in infection prevention.